Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on the invisible forces that really drive today's biggest companies. We're talking about the assets you can't see or touch, intangible assets, and the rule book that tries to make sense of them all, International Accounting Standard 38. So let me just ask you a question. When you think of a company's most valuable asset, what pops into your head? You probably picture massive factories, right? Or maybe warehouses just stuffed with inventory. For a long, long time, you would have been right. But in our modern economy, well, the whole game has changed. Because so often, the most valuable thing a company owns is completely invisible. It's the secret recipe for a soda, the millions of lines of code that run a social network, or that feeling you get that makes you choose one brand of phone over another. These are intangible assets. And honestly, they're pretty much everything.
So, what exactly turns an invisible idea into a formal, recognized asset that shows up on a balance sheet? Well, for it to be official, it needs a really clear definition, a set of rules that everyone has to play by.
The official rulebook, IAS 38, gives us this very precise definition. An intangible asset is not just some good idea. It has to be an identifiable, non-monetary asset without physical substance. Now I know, that sounds a little dense, but it really just boils down to passing 3 simple tests. And this is the crucial part, this 3-step checklist. First, you have to ask, is it identifiable? Can you separate it from the company itself, maybe sell it or license it? Second, is it controlled? Does the company have the power to use it and, just as importantly, stop others from using it? And third, will it generate future economic benefits? Will it actually help make money down the road? So what are we talking about in the real world? Well, think about things like computer software. Patents and copyrights, those are the classic examples. But it also covers things you might not expect, like customer lists, super valuable brand names, and even the rights to motion picture films. All of these things tick the boxes. They can be separated, they can be controlled, and boy, can they generate value.
Okay, so let's say we have something that passes all 3 of those tests. How does it actually make its way onto the company's official financial statements, onto the balance sheet?
Well, there are 2 main ways this happens. The first way is pretty easy. A company just buys the asset. They acquire a patent from someone, or they take over another company and get its brand name. Simple enough. But the second path, that's where things get really tricky. That's when a company creates the asset itself. And this is where the accounting rules get extremely strict, and for a very, very good reason. What's fascinating is that the standard itself basically admits how hard this is. It says it's sometimes difficult to assess if these assets qualify. You can't just have a great meeting, decide you've come up with a brilliant brand, and then slap $1 billion value on your books. These rules are here specifically to stop companies from just inventing value out of thin air.
And to do that, IAS 38 draws a very bright line in the sand. It splits the whole process into 2 distinct phases. First, you've got the research phase. This is all the early stage, blue sky thinking. Any money you spend here, it's an expense, period. Then you enter the development phase. This is where you're actually building the thing. And here, and only here, can you maybe start counting the cost as an asset. This split is absolutely critical. It stops companies from hiding the costs of failed experiments by just calling them assets. It forces them to be honest.
So, that research phase is all about searching, exploring, and evaluating different possibilities. Every dollar spent chasing new knowledge or weighing your options has to be expensed right away. You can't just go back later and decide it was an asset all along. Now, to get out of the research phase and start building an asset in the development phase, a project has to clear 6 very high hurdles. You have to prove it's technically possible, that you actually intend to finish it, that you can use or sell it, that it's going to make you money, that you have the resources to see it through, and, this one's a biggie, that you can accurately track every single dollar you spend on it.
And the timing of when you clear these hurdles is literally everything. Here's a super simple example right from the standard. Let's say a company spends $1,000 on a project, but they only met all 6 of those criteria on December 1st. See that $900 they spent before that date? That's an expense. It's gone. Only the $100 spent after December 1st can be put on the balance sheet as an asset. There is no going back.
And finally, there's one massive read the fine print exception. The standard is crystal clear on this. Things like internally generated brands, newspaper mastheads, and customer lists can never be recognized as assets. And you might ask, why? Well, it's because the cost of creating them is seen as impossible to separate from the everyday cost of just running the business.
Okay, so we've jumped through all the hoops and we've actually managed to get our intangible asset onto the balance sheet. So, now what? How do we figure out what it's worth over time?
Because it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's not enough to just recognize it once. You have to consistently account for its value in all the financial statements that follow. IAS 38 gives companies two options here. The first, and let's be honest, the one that's used almost all the time, is the cost model. You just record the asset at its original cost and then gradually reduce that value over its life. It's simple, it's verifiable. The second option is the revaluation model, where you'd constantly update the asset to its current market value. Sounds great, right? But for intangible assets, it has one giant problem. And the standard itself tells you exactly why. This quote explains it perfectly. To revalue something, you need an active market. But how on earth do you find an active market for a unique brand name or a one-of-a-kind patent? The short answer is you can't. Each one is totally unique. There is no stock exchange for the Coca-Cola brand, and that's exactly why pretty much everyone sticks with the cost model. This brings us to the final part of our assets journey on the balance sheet, figuring out how its value gets used up over time.
Here, the standard splits assets into two different camps. First, you have assets with a finite life, like a patent that legally expires in 20 years. Its value predictably goes down over time. Or an asset can have an indefinite life. Now, this doesn't mean it lasts forever. It just means there's no foreseeable end to how long it will generate value, like a really powerful brand name that was bought in a takeover. And this distinction is really important because it totally changes the accounting.
For those assets with a finite, limited life, we use a process called amortization. It sounds fancy, but it's basically the same idea as depreciation for a physical asset like a car. You take the total cost and you spread it out as an expense over its useful life. Think of it like a prepaid data plan. You paid a lump sum up front, and every month you use up a little bit of that value. Same thing. So after all these rules, all these definitions, you might be wondering, why should I care? Why is understanding any of this so important? Because in the 21st century, this is where the real value is hiding. Understanding these rules is absolutely essential if you want to properly value the tech giants, the pharmaceutical companies, the media empires that dominate our world. These strict rules prevent a total free-for-all where companies could just make up numbers. They create a system that, yeah, it's complex, but it gives us trust and allows us to compare companies. For any serious investor or analyst, getting your head around this stuff isn't just an option. It's how you learn to see the invisible value. And all this leaves us with one final big thought. As we go deeper and deeper into an economy that's built on algorithms, data, and AI, the very definition of value is changing right under our feet. So the question we're all left with is, what will be the next great intangible asset? And how will we even begin to measure its worth?